Louise Chandler ran until her boots split at the seams, and the Oklahoma Territory dust turned her gray skirt the color of the earth itself. And when she finally stopped running, she was standing in front of a saloon in a town called Redrock with nothing to her name but a carpetbag, a Bible she had stolen from the man who called her ruined, and the absolute ironclad conviction that she would never let anyone call her that again. The year was 1882, and the Oklahoma Territory was not yet a state, which meant it was still a place where a woman could reinvent herself if she had the stomach for it. Louise had more than stomach. She had bones made of something harder than fear, though she had not always known it. She had learned it the night preacher Elias Croft stood at the pulpit in Calvary, Texas, and said her name aloud to a congregation of 300 people, saying it like it was a stone he was dropping into still water, watching the ripples spread until every person in that town looked at her differently. He had said she was ruined. He had said it slowly, with great relish, drawing out the vowel so that it rang off the wooden rafters of his church and settled into the ears of every farmer, every shopkeeper, every mother who had ever smiled kindly at Louise in the street. He had said it because she had refused him. He had said it because she had slapped his hand away in the church vestibule when no one was watching, and because she was 22 years old and alone in the world, and he had believed she had no recourse. He had been wrong about that last part. Louise had walked out of that church with her chin up, returned to the boarding house where she kept a room, packed everything she owned into one carpetbag in under 15 minutes, pried up the loose floorboard where she kept her savings, which amounted to $43 and some change, and she had taken the first stage headed north. She had crossed into the territory on a Tuesday morning in late April when the prairie grass was just beginning to show green at its roots, and she had felt something loosen in her chest that she had not known was tight. Redrock, Oklahoma Territory, was a railroad town that had not yet made up its mind what kind of town it wanted to be. There were 3 saloons, a general store, a livery stable, a land office, a doctor's surgery, a hotel with 6 rooms, and a church that met in a canvas tent because the congregation had not yet raised enough money to build proper walls. There was also a small schoolhouse, and it was this that interested Louise most, because she had been a schoolteacher in Calvary before Preacher Croft had stripped that from her too. She stood on the main street in the golden afternoon light with her carpetbag at her feet and the stolen Bible pressed to her ribs, and she looked at the schoolhouse and made a decision. But first, she needed a room. The hotel was called the Redrock Arms, which was a grand name for 4 unpainted walls and a sign that leaned slightly to the left. The woman behind the counter had a face like she had been arguing with the wind for several decades and had mostly won. Her name, Louise would learn, was Hazel Prout, and she was 60 years old and had buried 2 husbands and 1 business partner, and she ran the hotel and the adjoining laundry with the calm efficiency of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by anything. $1 a night, Hazel said without looking up from her ledger. 2 nights in advance if you're new to town. Meals are extra. Breakfast is at 6, supper is at 7. You miss either, you don't eat. I would like a room for at least a week, Louise said, possibly longer depending on whether I can find work. Hazel looked up then. She took in the split boots, the dusty dress, the set of Louise's jaw. She said nothing for a moment. What kind of work? Hazel asked. Teaching, Louise said. I have 2 years' experience. I can show you my credentials. She reached into the carpetbag and produced a folded paper, a certificate from the Calvary County School Board, signed and official-looking. Hazel looked at it briefly. Sheriff Briggs is on the school committee. So is Doc Whitmore and Marta Engel, who runs the general store. The last teacher they had left in February to get married, and the children have been running wild ever since. Go see them in the morning. Tonight you're $7 for the week, paid in advance. Louise paid it without flinching, though it left her with considerably less than she would have liked, and she followed Hazel up a narrow staircase to a room that was small and plain and perfectly clean, with a window that looked out over the main street and the open prairie beyond, stretching out in every direction until the sky swallowed it. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked out at that sky for a long time. She was still looking at it when she heard the sound of horses coming into town from the south, a group of riders, by the sound of it, moving at a comfortable pace. She stood at the window and watched them come down the main street. There were 5 of them, trail-worn men bringing a small herd of cattle to the rail yard at the edge of town. They were ordinary enough in the fading light, dusty and tired, until one of them turned his horse sideways to keep a steer from breaking toward the alley, and she saw his face clearly. He was not beautiful in the way that painters painted men. His jaw was too square, his nose had been broken at least once, and his hat was pushed back on his head in a way that suggested a man who had stopped caring very much about appearances somewhere around the age of 20. But there was something about the way he sat the horse that caught her eye and held it, a kind of relaxed authority, the ease of someone who had been doing exactly this for so long that the horse and the cattle and the wide open sky were all as natural to him as breathing. He said something to the steer in a low, even voice, and the animal turned and went where it was supposed to go, and the rider didn't seem to find this remarkable at all. Then he looked up at the hotel window just briefly, just a glance, and Louise stepped back from the glass, though she wasn't sure why. She told herself it was just that she was tired. She slept for 11 hours. In the morning she put on her cleanest dress, which was not very clean, and she went to see Sheriff Briggs, who was a broad, patient man with a gray mustache, and then Doc Whitmore, who spoke very quickly and seemed to consider everything a medical matter, and then Marta Engel, who ran the general store and had opinions on everything and shared them freely. By 10 o'clock in the morning, Louise had been hired to teach the Redrock school starting on Monday, at a salary of $22 a month with lodging allowance, and she walked out of Marta Engel's store into the bright Oklahoma sunshine, feeling something she had not felt in a long time. She felt like herself. She spent the rest of the morning at the schoolhouse, taking inventory of what was there, which was not much. 27 pupils ranging in age from 6 to 15, a primer, a geography book, 3 arithmetic texts, a jar of pencils, and a blackboard that needed resurfacing. She made a list of what she needed and went back to the general store. It was there that she met Oliver Hunter properly for the first time. He was at the counter, talking to Marta Engel about feed prices, and he had his hat in his hand, which she noticed because it was rare, in her experience, for a working cowman to stand indoors with his hat in his hand unless he had been raised to do it. He was taller than he had looked on the horse, which was saying something. He turned when the bell above the door rang as she came in, and he looked at her with the same direct, unhurried manner with which he had apparently looked at the errant steer last evening. "Miss," he said, nodding. "Good morning," Louise said, and went to the counter with her list. Marta Engel introduced them with the efficiency of a woman who was always doing 3 things at once. Louise Chandler, just hired for the school. Oliver Hunter, runs the Double H ranch out east of town. Oliver, Miss Chandler needs some school supplies ordered in. See if you're going that direction on your next trip to the rail office. Oliver Hunter looked at the list Louise set on the counter. "I can have these brought in on the supply wagon Friday," he said. "No trouble." "That's very kind," Louise said. "I'll pay for them, of course." "I know you will," he said, and there was nothing in his voice except a simple acknowledgement of the fact. He said it as though it would never have occurred to him that she would not, and somehow that was more respectful than any amount of elaborate courtesy would have been. He put his hat on as he went out the door, and Marta Engel watched Louise watching him go, and said nothing, which was unlike her, but she was smiling. The weeks that followed were the busiest of Louise's adult life, and she was grateful for it. She opened the school on Monday to 27 children who had been without a teacher for 2 months, and had largely reverted to the natural state of children everywhere when left unstructured, which is to say they were loud, creative, and had developed a complex social hierarchy that she had to dismantle and rebuild from scratch. She loved every minute of it. She had always known that teaching was the thing she was made for, and being back in a classroom, even one with an uneven floor and a stove that smoked when the wind came from the north, felt like pulling on a coat that fit exactly right. She settled into Raydrock with the quiet determination of someone who intends to stay. She learned which of Hazel's rules at the hotel were negotiable and which were not. She learned that Doc Whitmore was genuinely skilled despite his frantic manner, and that Sheriff Briggs played chess on Wednesday evenings with anyone who showed up, and that the tent church had a minister named Reverend Ames, who was nothing like Elias Croft, who was a small, mild man who preached without fire but with a great deal of genuine warmth, and who never once said anything from a pulpit that he would not have been comfortable saying face to face. She learned that Oliver Hunter came to town roughly once a week, on Fridays, to pick up supplies and attend to business at the land office. She did not arrange to encounter him on Fridays, but she did not arrange to be elsewhere on Fridays either, which amounted, if she was honest with herself, to roughly the same thing. The supplies he had arranged for the school arrived exactly when he said they would. He brought them in a wagon himself, along with two of his ranch hands, and he unloaded them with the same unhurried competence with which he appeared to do everything. When Louise came out of the school to thank him, he shook his head slightly, as if thanks were an unnecessary formality. "Children need books," he said. "Didn't seem complicated." "Most things aren't complicated to you, are they?" she said, and it came out more pointed than she had intended, some leftover sharpness from a life in which she had learned to hold people at a certain distance. He looked at her steadily. He had dark eyes, she noticed, not brown exactly, but something deeper, the color of good earth after rain. "Plenty of things are complicated," he said. "I just don't see the use in making more of them than they are." She thought about that for the rest of the afternoon, and found she did not have a good argument against it. On the third Friday after her arrival, Oliver Hunter came into the hotel dining room for supper, which he did not usually do, and found that the only empty seat was across from Louise, who was eating alone because Hazel Prout was in the kitchen and the traveling salesman who usually occupied the next table had left that morning. He stood at the entrance to the dining room for a moment, and she looked up from her book, and she said, because she had decided somewhere in the preceding 3 weeks to stop being unnecessarily guarded with people who had given her no reason to be, "You're welcome to sit, Mr. Hunter." He sat. They ate in a silence that was not uncomfortable, and then he asked about the school, and she told him about the curriculum she was building, and about Thomas Briggs, the sheriff's youngest, who was 9 years old and could do arithmetic in his head faster than she could do it on the blackboard. And Oliver Hunter listened the way he did everything, with his full attention, unhurried, without interrupting. When she stopped talking, he said, "I had a teacher like you once, in Missouri, Mrs. Caldwell. She thought I could do more than rope cattle." "Could you?" Louise asked. "Probably," he said, without any particular regret. "But I like what I do." She liked that answer. She wrote it down in her mind in the category of things she was accumulating about Oliver Hunter, which included: he had been raised somewhere with manners. He did not say things he did not mean. He was somewhere around 30 or perhaps a year or two more. He ran his ranch alone since his father had died 3 years ago, and his younger brother had gone to California. And he had never once, in any interaction with her, treated her as anything other than a person with full standing in the world. After that, they ate supper together on Fridays regularly, and neither of them made a formal arrangement of it. It simply happened the way things happen when two people stop finding excuses to be elsewhere. It was on a Friday evening in late May that he told her about the ranch. They had finished eating and were sitting on the hotel porch in the last of the evening light, because Hazel allowed it as long as everyone was decent, which they were. The prairie was lit gold and rose at the horizon. The cattle in the distance, nothing but dark shapes moving slowly. Started with 160 acres my father filed on in 74, Oliver said. Bought the adjacent parcel in 78. Now it's closer to 450. Good water on the east end, a creek that doesn't run dry even in August. You love it, Louise said, not a question. Yes, he said simply. What's hard about it, she asked, because she had noticed that he talked about the ranch the way men talked about things they loved deeply and lived with completely, which meant they knew both its beauty and its difficulty with equal clarity. He was quiet for a moment. The loneliness of it sometimes, he said. You get so it doesn't bother you mostly. But in winter, when the wind comes down from the north and you've been out on the range for 3 days and you come back to the house and it's empty, you get so you hear the quiet different from how you'd like to hear it. Louise looked at her hands in her lap. I know something about that, she said. He looked at her then, and she felt the question in the look, felt it as clearly as if he had spoken it, but he didn't push, and she didn't offer, and they sat in the comfortable quiet until the stars started to come out, and Hazel appeared in the doorway to remind them both that she locked the front door at 9 o'clock sharp. The story of what had happened in Calvary, Texas came out in pieces over the following weeks, not because Louise planned to tell it, but because she had stopped being afraid of it. It began one Sunday morning when Reverend Ames mentioned preacher Elias Croft's name from the pulpit. He had apparently heard Croft speak at a revival in Fort Worth some years back and was referencing a theological point. Louise went very still, and Marta Engel, sitting beside her, noticed, and did not say anything in church but came to find her afterward, and Louise, surprised by the directness of Marta's concern, told her the essential outline. Marta Engel's response was to make a sound that suggested she had opinions about men like Elias Croft that were not suitable for a Sunday morning, and then she said, "Well, you're here now. And nobody in Redrock is going to be told anything by a preacher they haven't met." "That's good to know," Louise said. But it was Oliver she told the full version to, one Friday evening in June when the air had gone warm and soft, and the fireflies were just beginning to appear at the edges of the grass. She told him because he asked, quietly and without pressure, whether she had left Texas under difficult circumstances, and she decided in that moment that if she was going to keep spending Friday evenings on this porch with this man, she wanted there to be no version of herself she was hiding. She told him about Elias Croft, about the vestibule, about the slap, about the pulpit. She kept her voice even and her eyes forward on the darkening prairie. She told him what the word ruined felt like when it came off a preacher's tongue in front of 300 people who had known her since childhood. When she finished, there was a silence. Then Oliver Hunter said, in a voice so quiet and so certain that it had the quality of something settled long ago, "That word has never frightened me." She turned to look at him. He was looking at her steadily, the way he looked at everything. "Louise," he said, and it was the first time he had used her given name, and the way he said it was so different from the way Elias Croft had said her full name from the pulpit, it might as well have been a different language. He said it like it was the name of someone he respected. A man like that calls someone ruined because he's been refused, and he needs to feel like he's still got power over the refusal. It doesn't say anything about you. It says everything about him. She looked at him for a long moment. The fireflies drifted in the grass. Somewhere across the street, the door of the saloon swung open and released a brief burst of piano music before swinging shut again. "You are not the first person to say something like that to me," she said. "Marta said something similar, and Hazel in her way, but when you say it, Mr. Hunter, I believe it differently." "Oliver," he said. "Oliver," she said. And that was the evening everything between them shifted from the comfortable and cautious into something that moved with its own gravity, pulling them forward without effort. He started finding reasons to be in town on days other than Friday. She started finding reasons to walk past the livery stable on mornings when she knew he would be there. They were transparent in these machinations to everyone in Redrock except perhaps to each other, or perhaps they were transparent to each other as well, and the transparency was its own pleasure. Marta Angel began setting aside the good fabric when new bolts arrived, in case Louise needed it, which was pointed enough that even Louise could not miss the implication. Hazel extended the porch sitting rule to 9:30 without being asked, which was pointed in a different way. It was Sheriff Briggs who said it plainly, because Sheriff Briggs was that kind of man. He said it to Oliver on a Wednesday chess evening, with no preamble whatsoever, in the middle of a fairly involved middle game. "You planning to do something about that woman, or are you going to let her spend another winter alone in that hotel room?" Oliver moved his bishop. "I'm working on it," he said. "Work faster," Briggs said, and took the bishop with a pawn. July in Oklahoma Territory was a furnace with occasional merciful winds, and Louise taught school in a room that was hotter than she would have liked, with children who were restless and sweaty and could not be blamed for it. She developed a system of afternoon lessons that moved outside under the cottonwood trees when the heat inside became unreasonable, and she taught geography by having the children draw maps of the county in the dirt, and she taught arithmetic by counting cattle in the far pasture, and she taught reading by writing sentences about things the children already cared about on the blackboard. The school committee was pleased. Parents stopped her in the street to thank her. She had become, without quite noticing it happen, part of Redrock. On a Saturday in July, Oliver came to town in the afternoon rather than the morning, which was unusual, and he came to the schoolhouse, which was also unusual since it was a weekend and Louise was only there because she liked the quiet. He knocked on the open door and she turned from the blackboard where she was preparing Monday's lesson, and something in his face made her straightforward instinct kick in. "Something happened," she said. "Nothing bad," he said quickly. "I just thought you might like to come out and see the ranch, if you want to. Marta and her husband are coming Sunday for the midday meal, and I thought, if you weren't otherwise engaged." He stopped. He was not, she had observed, a man who rambled, and the rambling was therefore significant. She smiled. She could feel the warmth of it in her own face, which surprised her because she had gotten so accustomed to keeping her expressions carefully assembled. "I would like that very much," she said. Sunday was clear and brilliant, the kind of July day that made the territory look like a painting, and Marta Angel's husband Carl drove them all out in his wagon. The double H spread out in the morning light with a kind of simple, unassuming beauty. The house itself, a log and frame structure that was larger than Louise had expected, solid and well-maintained, with a porch that ran along the south face and looked out over the creek Oliver had described. The outbuildings were in good repair. The cattle in the south pasture were fat and calm. 2 ranch hands were working near the barn, and they nodded respectfully when the wagon pulled in. Oliver was waiting on the porch. He had cleaned up, she noticed, and the noticing made her feel something affectionate and slightly breathless. Marta Angel looked at Louise and smiled with great serenity and said nothing, which was unlike her, and therefore deliberate. The meal was simple and good. Oliver could cook, which she had not expected, and she told him so, and he said his mother had insisted on it, that his mother had said a man who couldn't feed himself was a nuisance to everyone around him, and Louise decided she would have liked his mother. After the meal, Carl, Angel, and Marta sat on the porch in 2 of the 4 chairs, and Oliver took Louise down to the creek, which was exactly as he had described, running clear and steady even in July, shaded by cottonwoods that dipped their fingers into the current. They walked along the bank without speaking for a while, which was one of the things she had come to value about him. That silence with him was not empty but full, a companionable thing that didn't demand to be filled. "I've been thinking," he said finally, stopping at a wide bend in the creek where the water ran shallow over smooth stones. "So have I," she said. He looked at her. "What have you been thinking?" "That I am happier in this territory than I have been anywhere," she said carefully. "And that a significant portion of that happiness is related to Friday evenings on a hotel porch." He was quiet for a moment, watching the water. "I'm not a complicated man," he said. "I don't say things I don't mean, and I don't make promises I can't keep. I know you came here running from something that did you a serious wrong. I'm not asking you to forget that or to pretend it didn't happen, but I want to say to you plainly and clearly that I would like to be the person you come home to. If that's something you could want." Louise looked at the creek. A kingfisher shot past in a streak of blue and disappeared around the bend. The cottonwood leaves turned silver in the breeze. Somewhere behind them, on the porch, Marta Angel was quite possibly craning her neck in an effort to determine what was happening. "Oliver," she said, turning to face him. "I came to this territory with nothing but a carpetbag and $43 and a stolen Bible, and I was not sure I would ever trust anyone again. And then I met you, and you were so entirely without agenda, so completely without any desire to make me feel less than what I am, that I didn't know what to do with it for several weeks." He waited. "I would very much like to be the person you come home to," she said. The way he smiled then was quiet and complete. The way everything about him was quiet and complete. And when he reached out and took her hand, she felt the calluses of his palm against her fingers, and she held on. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and when Marta Angel saw them coming, she made no effort whatsoever to pretend she hadn't been watching, and she simply said with great satisfaction, "Well, it's about time." The summer moved forward with the heat and the light and the particular quality of joy that comes from having found something you did not know you were looking for. Oliver came to town twice a week, sometimes 3 times. Louise went out to the Double H on Sundays when the weather allowed. They rode the property together, and he showed her every part of it: the north pasture where the grass grew tallest, the east corner where his father had first built a lean-to in 1874, and which Oliver had expanded into the proper barn that stood there now. She told him things about herself that she had not told anyone, about her parents who had died of fever when she was 16, about the years in Calvary where she had taught school and believed herself content, until she realized that contentment without roots was just a quieter kind of loneliness. He told her about the territory in those early years, when it was genuinely wild, when the law was inconsistent and the land was contested, and a man made his own order or did without it. He told her about the winter of 1879, when the temperature dropped so fast that cattle froze standing up, and about the locust year of 1876, when a farmer south of Redrock watched his entire crop disappear in 40 minutes. He told her these things not as complaints but as facts, the way a man talks about the place he has chosen to make his life, clear-eyed and without illusion. And in the telling and the listening, in the Friday evenings and the Sunday afternoons and the Tuesday mornings when he came to town for no particular reason except that she was there, they built something that neither of them had a name for yet but both of them recognized as real. It was in August, on a scorching afternoon, that trouble came to Redrock in the form of a letter. Louise was in the schoolhouse when Hazel Prout came to find her, which meant it was important, because Hazel did not make unnecessary trips in August heat. She had a letter in her hand, its seal already broken because it had been opened by mistake. She said, though Louise suspected Hazel was not above reading other people's correspondence if she thought they needed to be prepared for what was in it. "It came addressed to you in care of the hotel," Hazel said, handing it over. "The return address is Calvary, Texas." Louise's hands were very steady as she took the letter. She read it standing there in the schoolhouse with Hazel watching. It was from the deacon of Calvary First Baptist, not from Elias Croft directly, but written in a tone that made clear Croft had influenced if not dictated it. It said that a man named Reverend Elias Croft was planning to travel north through the territory on a speaking circuit that fall and would be coming through Redrock in October. It said, with barely concealed menace dressed in the language of Christian concern, that the Reverend hoped to see his old acquaintance Miss Chandler doing well, and hoped she had made good decisions about her reputation in her new home. Louise folded the letter. She was quiet for a moment, and then she looked up at Hazel. "He's coming here," she said. "I read that part," Hazel said without apology. "He wants me to be afraid," Louise said. "Yes," Hazel said. Louise set the letter down on her desk. She walked to the window and looked out at Redrock's Main Street, at the general store and the hotel and the land office and the sheriff's office and the tent church, at the people going about their business in the heat, people who knew her name and her work and her Sunday dinners at Oliver's ranch. She had built something here. She had built it carefully and with her own hands, and she was not going to let Elias Croft's shadow fall across it. "I'm going to talk to Sheriff Briggs," she said. "And then I'm going to talk to Oliver. And then I'm going to go back to teaching arithmetic because my students have a test on Friday, and none of them are ready for it." Hazel Prout looked at her for a moment with something in her face that might have been admiration. "That's a sensible plan," she said. She went to Sheriff Briggs first. He read the letter, folded it, handed it back, and said, "Elias Croft has been through other territories before. He's not a wanted man, so I can't stop him coming. But he's got no jurisdiction here, and what he says from a circuit revival pulpit is just noise if you've got people around you who know the truth." He paused. "Do you want me to be at the meeting when you talk to Oliver, or can you handle that yourself?" "I can handle it myself, thank you," she said, and she was already on her way out the door. She found Oliver at the livery stable in the middle of having one of his horses reshod, and she told him plainly and without preamble, standing in the shade of the livery door with the smell of hay and iron in the air. He listened to the whole thing without interrupting. He did not get loud or dramatic. He looked at the ground for a moment when she finished, and then he looked at her, and his jaw was set in a way that she had not seen before. "He is not going to come to this town and say his piece about you," Oliver said, "not while I'm here." "I don't want you to fight him," Louise said immediately. "That's not what I need." "I know," he said. "I'm not going to fight him. But there is a difference between a man talking nonsense into an empty room and a man talking nonsense in front of a community that believes him. Elias Croft is powerful because he walks into towns where nobody knows the truth. Redrock knows the truth. Redrock knows you." She stood there in the livery door in the August heat and looked at this man, this straightforward, unhurried, entirely unfrightened man, and she felt something in her chest that had been braced against the world for a very long time begin, slowly and with great care, to open. "Oliver," she said. "Louise," he said. "I think I love you," she said, and she said it the way she said things, directly, without performance, meaning every syllable. He crossed the distance between them in 2 steps, and he took her face in his hands, calloused and warm, and he looked at her for a moment, and then he said, "I know I love you. I've known it since May when you told me about Calvary, and I wanted to drive down there and have a conversation with that preacher that neither of us would have enjoyed." She laughed, which she had not expected to do, and then he kissed her, which she had expected and which was nonetheless entirely sufficient. The blacksmith who was working on Oliver's horse made a diplomatic decision to pay extremely close attention to the shoe he was fitting, and to see nothing at all. The weeks that followed had a new quality to them, a brightness at the edges that Louise recognized as happiness, the real kind, not the composed and carefully maintained kind she had managed in Calvary, but the genuine article, which was louder and less tidy and considerably more worth having. Oliver began talking about the ranch in the first-person plural, saying things like, "We want to fix that north fence before winter," and catching himself the first few times and then eventually not catching himself, just saying it, and Louise did not correct him. She had begun to think of the double H with a proprietorial warmth that she recognized and did not try to argue away. She thought about the south-facing porch in the mornings with coffee. She thought about the kitchen and what she would plant in a garden along the east wall. She thought about these things practically and specifically, which meant they were real thoughts, not daydreams. But October was coming, and with it Elias Croft. In the 3rd week of September, Oliver asked her to marry him. He did it on a Sunday evening when they were on the ranch porch watching the last light go off the land, and he did it the way he did everything, simply and directly. "I want to marry you," he said. "Not because of Croft coming. That's got nothing to do with it. I want to marry you because I want to spend my life with you, and I want that to be a fact, not just a feeling." Louise put her coffee cup down on the porch rail and looked at him. "I want that too," she said. "Yes, plainly and completely yes." He produced a ring from his shirt pocket, which made her laugh again because it meant he had planned this, had carried it there through the whole afternoon of riding and supper and sitting and talking, waiting for the moment to feel right. It was a simple gold band with a small turquoise stone, and it had belonged to his mother. She held out her hand. They were married in the second week of October by Reverend Ames in the tent church, with more of Reedrock in attendance than the tent was strictly designed to hold. Marta Engel had been the primary organizer and had opinions about the flowers and the food and the arrangement of the chairs, all of which she implemented with great vigor. Hazel Prout attended in the good hat she wore for significant occasions, and Sheriff Briggs served as one of the witnesses, and the blacksmith from the livery came and sat in the back row and looked satisfied in the way of someone who felt he had personally contributed to this outcome. Louise wore a blue dress that Marta had helped her make from the good fabric that had been set aside, and her hair was up, and she walked down the aisle between the chairs with her chin level and her eyes on Oliver Hunter's face, and the whole tent was very quiet. Oliver wore a clean white shirt and his good vest, and had clearly made an effort to bring his hair to heel, with limited but earnest success. When she reached him, he looked at her the way he had looked at her on that Sunday in July by the creek, complete and steady and without reservation. Reverend Ames read the words quietly and clearly, and when he got to the part about speaking now or forever holding one's peace, there was a moment of silence that seemed slightly longer than usual, and then it passed, and Oliver said his vows in a voice that did not waver, and Louise said hers in a voice equally certain, and Reverend Ames said the words that made it official, and Oliver kissed her in front of all of Reedrock with appropriate restraint but evident sincerity. The celebration afterward was held in the hotel dining room and Hazel's adjacent parlor, and Marta's husband Carl played fiddle, which it turned out he was very good at, and the evening was warm and loud and full of the particular quality of joy that belongs to communities celebrating their own. In the middle of the celebration, the door of the hotel opened. The man who came in was thin and dressed in black, and wore a hat that he removed immediately upon entering, revealing a face that was handsome in a way that had already begun to harden into something less pleasant. He was somewhere around 50, with iron-gray hair and the kind of eyes that were always assessing the room. Louise recognized Elias Croft immediately. She felt Oliver's hand find hers, and she felt it so immediately and so surely that she knew he had seen the man at the same moment she had. The music stopped, because Carl Engel had also seen, and because there were enough people in the room who had heard enough about Elias Croft to feel the temperature change. Croft looked around the room with the particular composure of a man who was very accustomed to being the most important person in any space he entered. His eyes found Louise. "Miss Chandler," he said. "Mrs. Hunter," she said, and her voice was absolutely even. The pause that followed had a texture to it. Croft looked at Oliver. Oliver looked at Croft with the same unhurried, direct regard with which Oliver looked at everything, and if it had been a landscape assessment, the conclusion would have been that the terrain presented no particular challenge. Sheriff Briggs materialized from somewhere in the room with the calm purpose of a man who has been watching the door for exactly this. He stood at a courteous but unmistakable distance from Elias Croft. "Reverend," Briggs said pleasantly. "I understand you're on a circuit through the territory. Where are you headed?" Croft said nothing for a moment. He was looking at Louise, and the look had in it all the things he had said from the Calvary pulpit, but here in this room, surrounded by the faces of people who knew her, who had watched her teach their children and eat Sunday dinner at Oliver Hunter's table and say her vows in front of all of them, the look had nowhere to land. "I was passing through," Croft said. "Good of you to stop in," Briggs said. "We're having a wedding celebration, as you can see. I suspect the lady of the evening has everything she needs. If you're looking to continue north, the road is clear. If you need a room for the night, The hotel has one vacancy, but Hazel sets a rule about noise after 9. Hazel Prout said nothing, but she moved with great dignity to stand slightly behind and to the left of Sheriff Briggs, and her expression was the expression of a woman who had buried 2 husbands and a business partner, and was not in the least concerned about a thin man in a black coat. Marta Angel came to stand beside Louise, and then Carl with his fiddle, and then several other people in the gradual organic way that communities close ranks when they've decided who belongs. Elias Croft looked at Louise one more time. She met his eyes. She felt Oliver's hand warm and steady in hers, and she thought of the pulpit in Calvary and the 300 people and the word that had been meant to hollow her out, and she looked at Elias Croft across the warm and crowded room where she had just been married, and she felt nothing that resembled fear. "I hope your circuit goes well, Reverend," she said. Croft's jaw moved slightly. He put his hat back on. He said, "I see you've done well for yourself." And the sentence was so different from what he had intended when he wrote that letter, so entirely absent of the power it had been designed to carry, that it was almost sad. Then he turned and went back through the door. The door swung shut. Carl Angel lifted his fiddle and played a single sweeping note, and the room came back to life, louder than before, and Marta Angel hugged Louise with great energy, and Sheriff Briggs returned to his position near the food table with the satisfied air of a man who has resolved a situation without incident, which was, he felt, the ideal kind of resolution. Oliver turned to Louise. The room was warm and loud around them. "All right," he said. "Entirely," she said. He smiled, and it was the smile she had first seen in the livery in August, full and quiet in hers. "Good," he said. "Because Carl is playing something I think you'd like to dance to, and I would like to dance with my wife." She had not danced in a long time, and he was not, he admitted, particularly skilled at it, but they danced anyway in the cleared space between the chairs, and the fiddle played something bright and sweeping, and the room was full of warmth and voices and the good noise of people who knew each other well. It was the best evening of Louise Chandler's life. Louise Hunter's life, rather. The name would take a week or 2 to feel natural in her mouth, and then one morning she woke up in the double H and thought it, and it fit. They moved to the ranch that weekend, and the empty quality Oliver had described in the winter quiet of the house began, immediately and unmistakably, to change. Louise had opinions about where things went in the kitchen, which Oliver accommodated with good humor. She planted a garden along the east wall in the following spring, which he helped her build beds for. She brought the stolen Bible from Calvary and put it on the shelf in the front room, and she told Oliver the story of it, that she had taken it from the church vestibule when she left because she had felt it was owed to her, and he considered this for a moment and said, "That seems right." She laughed and set it on the shelf. The school continued. She was not willing to stop teaching, which Oliver had never asked her to do. He was genuinely proud of what she did. The particular brightness in his eyes when he heard the children who stopped them in the street to tell Miss Chandler, Mrs. Hunter, about what they had been reading, was unmistakably the pride of someone who understood that the work mattered. The first winter on the ranch was cold and long, and they were entirely comfortable in it. Oliver taught her to read the weather coming down from the north, which clouds meant snow, and which meant only wind. She taught him what she had been doing with the upper-level arithmetic students, not because he needed it, but because she liked to talk about it and he liked to listen. They played chess on winter evenings, and she was better at it than he had expected and said so, and she said she had been playing since she was 12 and he could not really be surprised, and he was not. In the spring she told him she was expecting a child. He was in the barn when she told him, checking on a mare who had been favoring her left foreleg, and he turned from the mare and looked at her standing in the barn doorway, and his face went through several things in a short period of time, disbelief and then comprehension, and then something so plainly, helplessly joyful that she felt her eyes go warm. He crossed the barn in 4 long strides and picked her up, which he had never done before, and she made a sound of surprise and then held on, and he said into her hair, "That is the best thing I've ever heard." And she said, "Even better than the day I agreed to marry you." And he said, "Equal," which was the honest answer, and they both knew it. The summer of 1883 was good. The pregnancy was uncomplicated, which Doc Whitmore checked on with gratifying regularity and frequent unsolicited advice. Louise taught until July and then ceded the classroom to a temporary teacher named Agnes Polk, who was younger and willing, and whom Louise spent considerable effort training up before she handed the schoolroom over, because her students' education was not something she was prepared to leave to chance. In August, on a hot Wednesday morning when the creek ran low and the cottonwoods were heavy with summer, Louise Hunter gave birth to a son. They named him William, after Oliver's father, which Oliver had suggested, and Louise had agreed immediately, because she had come to feel William Hunter's presence in the land and the outbuildings and the careful construction of the barn, in everything Oliver had built on the foundation his father laid, and naming the child for him felt like the most natural thing. William Hunter arrived in the world with Oliver's dark eyes and Louise's determined jaw, which Doc Whitmore pointed out with some amusement, and he was strong and loud and extremely clear about his preferences from the first hour, which Hazel Prout, who came out to the ranch to see him, said meant he was going to be just fine. Marta Engel arrived the following day with more food than 3 people could eat in a week, and she held the baby and said he was perfect, and Carl Engel stood in the doorway and looked at Oliver with the expression of one man, acknowledging another's good fortune. Sheriff Briggs came on Saturday and held William with the practiced ease of a man who had grandchildren and said, "Good size. Good lungs on him, too. I can hear that from here," which was true because William was making his preferences about a feeding known with some volume. Oliver sat on the south porch that evening when the baby was finally asleep and Louise was resting, and he looked out at the land in the late light, the south pasture and the creek and the wide Oklahoma sky going pink and gold at the horizon, and he felt the particular quality of a life that has more in it than it had before, and it was not a feeling he had words for, but he understood it completely. Louise came to the porch door and leaned against the frame, and he turned to look at her. "Come sit," he said. She came and sat beside him, and he put his arm around her, and they looked at the land together in the evening quiet. "I was thinking," she said, "about that Tuesday in April when I came into Reed-Rock with my carpetbag." "What were you thinking about it?" "I was thinking that I was so angry then," she said. "Not frightened. I thought I was frightened, but it was anger mostly. That I had let that man have so much power over what I did next, that his word could send me running across a territory." "You weren't running from him," Oliver said. "Not really. You were running towards something." She considered this. "That's a generous interpretation." "It's an accurate one," he said. "You came here and you got a job and you made a home. That's not the action of someone running from something. That's the action of someone who knows what they want." She was quiet for a moment, listening to the evening sounds, the cattle settling, the creek, the wind beginning to come up from the south. "I'm glad I ended up here," she said. "I'm glad you did too," he said. They sat until the stars came out, and the same stars that had appeared on that first evening when she had stood at the hotel window and watched 5 riders come down the main street were now their stars, belonging to this porch and this land and this life in a way that was permanent and settled and full. The years that followed built on each other the way good years do, each one adding something to the whole. William grew with the same unhurried steadiness as his father, with the same directness, and he had Louise's sharpness at books and Oliver's ease with the land. And by the time he was 3, he was following his father around the ranch with a seriousness about the whole enterprise that made Oliver quietly happy every day. Louise returned to teaching the fall after William was born, with Marta Engel providing childcare during school hours with an enthusiasm that suggested she regarded this as a personal service to the community. The school grew. A second room was added in 1884 when the enrollment outgrew the single classroom, and Louise took the older children and trained Agnes Polk to handle the younger ones properly. The school committee asked Louise to serve on it, and she accepted. And in her first year, she got the school a subscription to 3 periodicals and a new geography atlas, and a full set of arithmetic primers. And she did it by writing a proposal so thorough and well-reasoned that Sheriff Briggs said it was the best document he had ever read and voted for it before she had finished presenting. Oliver expanded the ranch in 1885, buying the parcel to the north that had come available when its owner decided to go to California. It meant more work and more hands, and he hired 2 additional men, brothers from Missouri named Sampson and Pete Cleary, who were good workers and completely uninterested in anything beyond their work, which Oliver valued. The Double H was, by 1885, one of the better-run ranches in the territory, not the largest but among the most consistently profitable, because Oliver ran it the way he did everything, with patient attention to what was actually there. In the winter of 1884, Louise told him she was expecting again. He was in the kitchen this time, and he turned from the stove, and she saw the same helpless joy as before, quick and complete. "William is going to be surprised," Oliver said. "William is too," Louise said. "He will adjust." In the spring of 1885, she had a girl. They named her Clara, because Louise had always loved the name and Oliver had no objection, and Clara Hunter arrived in a manner strongly suggesting she was already in a hurry to get somewhere and would not be slowed down by anyone's timeline but her own. Doc Whitmore said she was the most impatient patient he had ever attended. William, who was 1 week away from his 2nd birthday, was brought to meet his sister by Oliver on the morning after her birth, and he stood at the edge of the bed and looked at Clara with an expression of profound skepticism that Louise suspected was going to characterize his relationship with his sister for some years. He was not wrong in the skepticism. Clara Hunter was, from the beginning, a force. She had Louise's will and Oliver's stubbornness, and she combined them in ways that were exhausting and magnificent. And by the time she was 3, she was carrying on extended arguments with William that William could not win because she had not yet developed a firm sense of when a conversation should end. The years passed with the particular quality of years that are full. There were hard seasons, the drought summer of 1886 when the creek ran to a trickle, and the grass burned yellow and Oliver, and his hands rode long days trying to keep the herd from losing more weight than they could afford. There was the winter of 1887, when a sickness came through the territory and hit the younger children hard, and Louise spent 2 weeks at the schoolhouse doubled as an unofficial nursing room, helping Doc Whitmore manage 7 children through fevers that broke, thankfully, without tragedy. There was the spring of 1888 when a dispute over the northern fence line with a neighboring landowner named Garvith required 3 weeks of mediation before Sheriff Briggs and a land agent came out and settled it in Oliver's favor with reference to the original survey documents. Through all of it they were a team, as simply and as naturally as they had become everything else together. When the drought was at its worst, Louise managed the household economy with such precision that they came through it in better shape than most of the other ranches in the county. When the sickness was running through the school, Oliver brought food and supplies to the schoolhouse every morning without being asked, moving in that quiet, purposeful way of his, doing what was needed. When the fence dispute was ongoing, she read the original land documents and found the survey markers that made the case conclusively, and Oliver had looked at the documents and then at her and said, "I married the right person," and meant it as a practical observation, which made it even better. In the late summer of 1888, Louise found out she was expecting a 3rd child. She told Oliver on the south porch, which was where they told each other the important things, the porch having become in the years of their marriage the place of serious conversations and quiet evenings and the accumulated weight of a life shared. He looked at her and smiled the same smile he always did, the one that started slowly and then was complete. 3, he said. Apparently, she said. William, who was 5, received this information with the resigned practicality of someone who had already been displaced once and had made his peace with the instability of family composition. Clara, who was 3, was immediately and fully in favor of a baby, and changed her position only once, briefly, when the baby arrived and turned out to be another brother, which she considered a personal inconvenience. The third child, born in the spring of 1889, was a boy, and they named him Henry, and he was the easiest of the 3, arriving in the world apparently determined to be no trouble to anyone, which Doc Whitmore said was a refreshing change, and which Oliver said was probably temporary. It was not temporary. Henry Hunter grew up calm and observant and deeply interested in everything, and he had Louise's love of books and Oliver's ability to be in the natural world with complete comfort, and he would spend long afternoons with a borrowed geology primer from the school library and a collection of rocks he kept in a tin box under his bed. And Louise loved him with a particular tenderness because she recognized in him the combination of inner life and outer ease that she had spent years learning for herself. Ridrock grew in those years too. The tent church was replaced by a proper wooden church in 1885, which Reverend Ames preached in with the same mild warmth he had always brought to his ministry. The Oklahoma Territory moved toward statehood through the complex and contested political years of the late 1880s, which brought land rushes and new settlers and all the upheaval that came with land that was being contested by competing interests, some of which were legal and some of which were not. The land rush of 1889 brought thousands of people to the territory in a single day. The great run for homestead claims that Louise watched from the school porch with her students, seeing the distant cloud of dust rise to the south where the former Indian lands were being opened, and she felt the complexity of it sharply, the excitement, and the profound injustice bound together in the same event. She did not keep this complexity from her students. She told them plainly that the land that was being settled on that day belonged, by right of occupation and tradition, to people who had lived on it for generations, and that the law that opened it had not asked those people what they wanted, and that a person could celebrate opportunity while also acknowledging what the creation of that opportunity had cost others. Sheriff Briggs, who heard about this lesson later, said it was exactly right, and Marta Engel said it was exactly the kind of teaching she had hired Louise for, and the school committee voted unanimously to extend her contract for another 2 years, at an increased salary, which the budget could now manage because the town had grown. Oklahoma became a territory with formal organization, and the process of governance became more structured, and Ridrock became a county seat, which brought more business and more people and a proper courthouse where the tent had once stood. Oliver was asked in 1890 to serve on the newly constituted County Land Board, which assessed disputes and recorded transfers, and he accepted because it was work that needed doing, and because he had spent long enough on land he cared about to understand what was at stake when records were wrong or boundaries were unclear. He went to the county seat twice a month and came home with the patient frustration of someone doing bureaucratic work who would rather be outside, and Louise listened to his reports on the various disputes and tangles with genuine interest and occasionally useful advice. The children grew. William became, in his steady way, exactly who he had always been going to be, quiet and capable and deeply attached to the land, following Oliver around the ranch with the increasing competence of someone who was genuinely learning the work rather than just observing it. By the time he was 8, he could ride well, and by 10, he was doing real work on the property, not make work but actual tasks that mattered, and Oliver taught him with the same patience he applied to everything. Clara grew into a person of tremendous confidence and vocal opinions, who was, by the time she was 6, the most interesting person in any room she entered, which was exhausting and wonderful. She had taken to Louise's books with a ferocity that made Louise feel a particular proud recognition, and she was reading well above her age by the time she came to Louise's classroom as a student, which meant Louise had to work harder to keep her challenged, which she was delighted to do. Henry moved through the world with his particular observant calm, collecting facts and rocks and questions, the way other children collected trouble. They were Sunday dinners with the Angel family, who had become as close as family. They were chess evenings with Sheriff Briggs, who remained a fixture of their lives. They were Hazel Prout at Christmas, who gave the children impractical presents and was unmoved by any suggestion that she had spent too much. They were the particular richness of a life that is filled in all its corners, and they were each other always, at the center of everything. Oliver and Louise had the kind of marriage that is built from the same materials as the work they did every day, from honesty and attention and the willingness to show up completely. They disagreed sometimes, in the serious and productive way of two people who both think clearly and are not afraid to say what they think. They found their way through every disagreement the same way, by talking it out on the south porch until they understood each other fully, and occasionally until the stars came out, and very occasionally until Hazel Prout's imaginary curfew would have applied had they been still living at the hotel. On their 5th wedding anniversary, in October of 1887, Oliver gave Louise a mare of her own, a bay with a white star on her forehead that Louise named Compass, which Oliver said was apt. She had learned to ride properly in the years on the ranch, and Compass became her horse with the completeness of an animal that has chosen its person, and she rode her out on the South Range on early mornings when the light was low and golden, and the grass was damp, and the world was enormous, and she was small in it in the very best way, feeling the territory around her with the clear-eyed love of someone who has chosen her place. On their 10th anniversary, in October of 1892, Oliver took her to Guthrie, which was now the territorial capital, and had a proper hotel and a restaurant that served food from an actual menu with several choices, which was a novelty sufficient to constitute a celebration in itself. They stayed 3 days and walked the streets of the new city that was being built on land that 5 years before had been open prairie, and they ate at the restaurant twice and attended a theatrical performance by a touring company from Kansas City, and on the last evening they sat in the hotel room and Oliver said, 10 years. 10 years, Louise said. Any regrets? He said. She considered it with the seriousness she brought to any real question. Then she said, I regret that it took me the better part of 3 weeks to stop being unnecessarily guarded with you when you had given me no reason to be. You had been given reason to be guarded, he said. With Elias Croft, yes, not with you. You didn't know that yet. No, she said. I didn't, but I should have trusted what I could see, and what I could see from the beginning was that you were honest all the way through. She paused. I've never told you, but the evening I first saw you, from the hotel window, when you were bringing the cattle in. You turned your horse sideways to head off a steer and you said something to it in a low voice, and the animal went where it was supposed to go, and you didn't seem to think that was remarkable. And I thought, there is a person who knows exactly who he is. Oliver was quiet for a moment. I've never told you this either, he said. But I looked up at the hotel window on that evening. I don't know why. Something made me look. And I saw a woman in the window just briefly, and I thought she looked like she had come a long way and was not going to let it cost her anything. Louise smiled. I had come quite a long way. You had, he said, and you didn't let it cost you anything. She reached across the small table between them and put her hand over his. We did all right, she said. We did better than all right, he said. They went home to the Double H 3 days later with new boots for Oliver, and a stack of books for Louise, and a length of fine blue fabric that Marta Angel had specifically requested from one of the Guthrie merchants, and the children descended on them at the front porch with the energy of people who had been managed with considerable success by the Angel family for 3 days, but were nonetheless very glad to see their parents. and Henry had a new rock he needed Louise to look at immediately. And Clara had a grievance about something William had done on the second day that needed to be formally acknowledged even if it was too late for consequences, and William stood slightly behind his siblings with the demeanor of someone who had had 3 perfectly peaceful days and considered the return of parental authority a mixed development. Louise looked at all 3 of them and felt the fullness of it press against the inside of her chest. She put her arm around Clara and heard out the grievance with appropriate seriousness. She looked at the rock with Henry and told him it was clearly significant and they would look it up in the geology primer tonight. She met William's eyes over the chaos of his siblings and she winked, and his mouth twitched in the suppressed smile that was so much his father's it sometimes stopped her breath. Oliver picked up Henry and carried him inside, still talking about the rock, and Clara walked close beside Louise with her hand in her mother's, still talking about William, and William came last with the bags because William was 9 years old and had the measure of his responsibilities. The evening was ordinary in all the ways that extraordinary lives are made of ordinary evenings. Supper, and the children's noise, and the long blue light of October fading over the south pasture, and then the children in bed and the house going quiet around them, and the south porch with 2 cups of coffee and the stars coming up over the territory. They sat in the good, familiar quiet. "What are you thinking?" Oliver asked. She looked at the stars, the ones she had first seen from Hazel Pruitt's hotel window on a Tuesday in April with nothing but a carpetbag and $43 and a stolen Bible. And she thought about the word that a man had said from a pulpit to hollow her out, and about the man beside her who had said with absolute certainty that the word had never frightened him, and about everything that had built itself in the space between those 2 moments. "I'm thinking about all of it," she said. He made the small sound that meant he understood exactly what she meant. They sat together in the October evening, the territory all around them in the dark, and the house behind them with the children asleep in it, and the land stretching out to the creek and the north pasture and the horizons in every direction. It was 1892, and they were a long way from everything that had tried to diminish them, and they were entirely, completely home. In the years that followed, Redrock continued to grow, and the territory continued its long, complicated journey toward statehood, which would come eventually in 1907, and which the whole Hunter family would witness, though that was still 15 years away in the evening Oliver and Louise sat on the porch in 1892 and did not know it yet. What they knew was the present, which was enough, which was more than enough. William would grow into the Double H the way he was always going to, with a natural authority over the land that was his father's and an ear for the whole of things that was his mother's. And when he was old enough, he would take on more and more of the ranch work until the day came when it was his as much as it was Oliver's. And Oliver would hand it over without ceremony or sentimentality, just a nod and a quiet word, because that was how the Hunters did things. Clara would go to school in Guthrie and then further, to the new university at Norman, and she would come back to the territory a lawyer in a time when women lawyers were rare enough that people commented on it, to which Clara had opinions she shared without reservation. She would set up a practice in the county seat, and she would be good at it, and Louise would sit in the courtroom the first time Clara argued a case, and she would feel something so fierce and proud that she had to keep very still to contain it. Henry would become, in his own time, a geologist, which nobody was surprised by, and he would go north and east and then west, following the rock formations with his organized patience, and he would come home to the Double H for Christmas every year without fail, arriving with new books and unusual gifts and stories from places the other Hunters had not been, and Oliver and Louise would sit across the dinner table from their 3 children and feel the fullness of what they had made together. But all of that was ahead, in the years that the south porch had not yet seen. On this October evening in 1892, there was only the present which was full and complete, the creek running in the dark to the east, the cattle settled in the pasture, the 3 children sleeping in their beds, The territory spread wide in every direction under a sky blazing with stars. Oliver set his coffee cup down and looked at Louise, and she looked back at him with the steadiness that had become, over 10 years, the bedrock of their lives together. "I love you," he said. "I love you too," she said. It was not remarkable in its plainness. It was not less true for being plainly said. It was, in fact, the most true thing either of them had ever said, in the way that the truest things are often the simplest ones, the ones that don't require ornamentation or performance, the ones that just sit in the air between two people and mean exactly what they say. Louise Chandler had come to the Oklahoma Territory in April of 1882, running from a preacher who had called her ruined, with a carpetbag and $43 and a stolen Bible and a jaw set against everything that had tried to take her down. She had not been ruined. She had never been ruined. She had been, as Oliver Hunter had known from the beginning without needing to say it in so many words, entirely and irreducibly herself, which was more than sufficient, which was more than enough, which was everything. The stars turned above the Double H Ranch in the Oklahoma Territory, and the south porch held the two of them in its wooden frame, and the good dark of the evening settled around everything like a hand laid gently over something precious, and the story that had begun with a woman running and ended with a woman home closed quietly and completely in the warm October air, as resolved and as real as the land itself.